This is 5th of September, 71, and this is a talk on a basic qual. Now, the first you hear of this, the first anybody heard of this, really, was Flag Bureau Data Letter 101 of 5 August 71. And this came along at a time when word clearing was restored. I have a hat that nobody quite notices, and it's the finder of lost tech. Now, some people go all of their lives looking for the mystery of the pattern of the pyramid, and others go looking for the Mayan civilization and how it built things, and I go looking for the tech people have lost in Dianetics and Scientology as a primary expeditionary action. This begins some time ago when, with horror, I found out they'd lost all of expanded lower grades. Quickie grades had come in, and you're just now recovering technically from the loss of the full text of early Dianetics. And that was dropped out and wasn't gotten back in for literally years. It dropped out for years, and then we've been working really very hard since '69 to get it in. Right now, amazingly enough, you find me restoring Class 8 technology. I have a mission right now restoring Class 8 technology. ASHO, for instance, going into a campaign in ASHO trying to restore power technology. There was a mission, and then they got a hidden data line going and a verbal communication line going, and power went out again. And the finding of lost tech is a very, very interesting hat, because people manage to lose it at the drop of a bulletin. And that is very important, because that is the primary function and action of Qual. It is not patching up some case that has been messed up by the HGC. I'm passing you this hat. The finder of lost tech. Now, there are several ways that tech gets lost. And first and foremost amongst them is the misunderstood word. And the student comes to you and he says, HCOB, something or other, written by so-and-so, actually is in conflict with HCOB, boff, and so on, and we don't know whether to turn on the E-meter with the right hand or left hand. We're all confused, and I can't make it out. And you say, look, it's a misunderstood word, son. Let's find it. Oh, no, it's not a misunderstood word. That's actually, all these things are in conflict with everything else, and everything is in conflict with, and so on. I'm going mad. You say, now, look, take it easy. Be quiet, be calm, and sit down, pick up the cans, and let's find out where on that earlier bulletin there's a word you don't understand. And so he reads it, method 2, to you, and he has never understood HCOB. He has not understood remimeo, and he doesn't know the word at, he doesn't know the word such, and he has never figured out what is the word this. And after you've cleaned all this up, got it all nicely looked up, now you say, read the bulletins. Oh, yeah, nothing, no conflict there. What was I talking about? All of these wild technical confusions begin with a misunderstood word, and in actual fact don't exist at all. Now, enough people at St. Hill, sometime after I left there, 66, 67, 68, enough people misunderstood enough words, so the students were then told the early material of the course and all of the material on the course and anything you're studying on this course is historical, and it is only background information, and we don't use it anymore. And that was the system by which it vanished. And what do you know? People were starting to get mad at them in the community. They were not delivering tech. The results were no longer there. And you would just be amazed at the number of cases that we crack right down the center and push right up from the bottom of one of these personality graphs on 1956 tech. There isn't a case in the world that wouldn't crack up on GF40 expanded, which has in it the running of engrams narrative. And of course, when it goes into drugs, that's also with somatics. The full drug rundown can be done from it. And listing, which is grade 3, class 3, level 3 material. GF40 expanded. There isn't an interiorization rundown that has gone wrong, that hasn't gone wrong because of 1962 technology. In other words, when they lose the tech, they don't do the tech, they don't get the results. They're going, ugh. And they lose the tech through the misunderstood word. Now that 64 technology managed to stay on the study tapes utterly unused until we suddenly started to dust it off and put it in picture book form and began to issue it in the recent series. Now, if you recognize this as the operating background of technology, you will see then that somebody has to be a custodian of not just the books, but the meaning of the books. And if that is kept in, the technology will continue to win. So the probable earliest applicable policy letter is Keeping Scientology Working, with which you're all familiar. Now, who does that? Qual does that. Now, if you look at Qual from that point of view, suddenly it makes a great deal of sense. And if at any time you become confused as to what you're supposed to be doing, or any time any one of your staff in Qual becomes confused as to what they're supposed to be doing, point out that the essential commodity of the organization is knowledge. And before it is a deliverer of tech, it is a custodian and disseminator of knowledge. And the only thing that makes that organization any different than anything they've been doing for the last umpty-umpt trillion, billion, skillion years is the fact that it has knowledge that unravels the knots and problems that man has been cracking his brains with ever since he wondered, after he had made the stone axe, why he was so unhandy with it. Knowledge, that is the one thing which has appeared along this line. And this is true, because the most successful franchises have been those which featured knowledge. And people came in, and one franchise that was running at a very, very high level, and I think they stopped the successful pattern in it, had a group, and people met, and people from the public came in, and so on, once a week. And they took up HCO policy letters. Now, it's very interesting. You say, well, the public wouldn't be interested in that. No, that's not right. The whole public is all worried about organization. They're caught in the middle of a hurricane of organization or of disorganization. They are interested in it, and there are many policy letters which are very good. The franchise also would take up HCOBs and so on, but the policy letters were quite a hit. And so all they do would be to read this policy letter and to them and discuss this policy letter and talk about this policy letter. Now, that is pure export of knowledge. There have been comparable actions on the past track, one of them when the Emperor of China sent one of his people over to India to import all of the textbooks of Buddhism. And they did, and translations occurred. And Buddhism eventually, up through the years, since it wasn't pushed very hard and so forth, eventually permeated and got all through China. Japan was just hanging by its tail from the trees until Buddhist monks came in, and Buddhist monks brought them religion and also brought them culture. And they brought them writing, painting, pottery making, and that sort of thing. But those were incidental. They brought them knowledge. Knowledge itself is something. And what org anywhere at the present moment preserves it, except perhaps for the staff for application? And yet it is an important commodity. So if you find out, why does knowledge get lost? It gets lost because of the misunderstood word. And that in itself is a magnificent piece of knowledge, because nobody ever knew that before. How do things squirrel? How do they get altered? They get altered because of a misunderstood word. It is so good, and this is so positive as technology, that the other day I cleared up the whole capability of a person on post here on this ship by just listening to the trouble he was having, but mainly to how he was solving it. He was given a certain type of material to write, and when he read that, he read it, and it was telling him what to write for mission orders and so on. As he told me, he said he went then and found a couple of old mission orders of that particular type he was confused about, and looked them up to see how that was done. Sounds perfectly okay, doesn't it? Except this is a brand new type of mission order that's never been written before. And I said to my messenger, I said, would you please go down and find what misunderstood word occurs immediately before that mission order type is discussed. Now, actually, I may be telling tales out of school, but it all has a very happy ending. Messenger spent 2 hours with him and finally found right alongside of it the word such. And he had never known what that meant. And that cleared up, and his GIs came in, and now he grasped the whole thing completely, and he's a howling success. The odd part of it is he's been worried for some months about the quality of what he was writing. And it all hung up on a little tiny word in English. So this is the first thing, then, that you would have to do to keep Scientology working and keep technology present. The reason why you have somebody in an org running power on the PC before Dianetics, because after he's expanded the lower grades, his shoe straps need adjusting, is because usually he doesn't know the English word a, an, and the. And wherever you find altered tech in an org, you will find it preceded by a misunderstood simple word. And there is the source and point of alterers exactly. If you were to go into ASHO at this moment and comb over all of those auditors who were having trouble with power, you would find the verbal data line was more acceptable because they had already collided with a misunderstood simple English word. The big oddity being, and this is really a huge oddity, is that the complex terms of Dianetics and Scientology they take in their stride. People speak on this ship better Scientology than they do English. It's a fact. It's a subject of survey. The reads occur on English. Person starts to read a bulletin, starts to read something, and what do you find? You would be sure that ARC Break would read. Doesn't. Even when he's got one. But the word then reads. You actually have to see it to believe it. And your hands should get very dirty with this material, and you should get to a point where you know this so well that you never falter. Here is an HAS who was going back to his org, and we found that word clearing had dropped out recently on the FEBC, and so I said, we've got to brief these fellows within 2 hours and get them on the plane, and there's all these people, for heaven's sakes, get yourself a bunch of auditors, do method 2 on their mission orders. I will tell you the misunderstood words which read here on an FEBC graduate, where method 2 had not been in use for a while. Believe me, it's in use now. Wow. There's handy automatic thumb screws leap over and jump onto the supervisors the moment if every half hour they haven't mentioned the word, or meter, or method 2, it's set up as an automatic computer, and these thumb screws jump out from the walls. Listen to these words. Organization, flag, standard, no, K-N-O-W, HCO area sec, briefed, fired, action, flag org management, situation, HASs, demands, neglected, hatting, post, establishment, continued, maintain, why, policy, PLs, deviation, producing. Well, I will save you the rest of it. It goes on this way for 4 pages. There it is. The words are circled. And that's the exact material this man had been studying for several months. So, what can you adjudicate from that? That there should be somebody in an organization that keeps this straight. In fact, there should be an organization in the organization that keeps this straight. And as long as you do that, the organization will win, it will become prosperous, the people will be happy and cheerful, and you get one of these scenes where the public walking along is slapping the staff on the back and congratulating them and telling them they're great fellows, and one of these places where tech is in, and the public and the customers are getting big wins and so on. You've seen an org when it's in that state, and when its tech has gone, why, it's not in that state. The public walks through and they don't really look at anybody very much, or they come in snarling, yell me in intensity, when are you going to do it, you know? And that is the difference. And when an org is jumping and enthusiastic and so on, there is a minimum of misunderstood words in it. And when an org is all thud, don't know, you think it comes from the significance of a GI or from the fact that somebody isn't Bruthwolf, or the fact that somebody's raising hell with the staff or something. No. The only difference between a very happy org and a very glum, we'll all commit suicide tomorrow sort of an org is simply the misunderstood word. Now, a good Qual, then, is perfectly capable of straightening out all the alter is in an org and sending its stats up through the roof with no ethics at all. The degree of ethics that has to be applied in an org is directly proportional to the number of misunderstood words. So, if you do your jobs well, you won't get into one of these, see an org get into one of these heavy ethics scenes. Now, you say, well, what's the difference between this Qual and any other Qual? Well, this is actually a different Qual. This is a different Qual. We take everything that we have known as a Qual, and if you are going to bring back in review, and if you are going to do this or that or the other thing that a full Qual would do, it goes over into Department 15. Division 5, Department 15, that is now called the Department of Validity, and has a Director of Validity, and it has Qual, Interview and Invoice, and it has the Examiner, and it has Certs and Awards. Now, of course, there's the Student Examiner, and there is the PC Examiner, and there is anything we once knew as Qual fits there. But there would also be here any review, public review of PCs, that would be there. A review auditor would be there. A cramming of students, that would be there. Any Qual that you've known has gone over to 15. And that leaves 2 other departments open. So, this is published in HCO Policy Letter, 14 August 1971, Issue 2. Now, that tells us where old Qual is. Now, all you really have to preserve of old Qual, however, today, is the I&I, the Interview and Invoice, the examiner, student examiner, PC examiner, and certs and awards. That's all that has to be preserved. And they, of course, have to be there. And you'll find out in one form or another those exist in most orgs. So the action is just to take anything they've got in Qual and say you're now all Department 15. And then you put in the rest of it. They may have a staff training officer. If they do have, that's rare, but if they do have, he goes back over into 13. So if they have a staff training officer, he can be placed over into 13. But the main thing for you to know is that this is really a mini Qual. And the new idea here, which was what was really meant in FBDL 101 when this first emerges, is that we are discussing a mini Qual. We really aren't discussing a full, big dress parade Qual. It will grow. Just make sure that it does. But it doesn't take much to get in a small Qual. Now, they've got somebody over there who examines and makes up the certs. Well, good. Put him over in 15. Now, what about I and I? Now, in view of the fact that Department 13, with word clearing, has something to sell, you don't want that invoiced on credit, particularly, so it can be sold from the registrar. If it is delivered in 13, it can be sold from the registrar, but in that case, your interview and invoice would simply have to be shown the fact that it was invoiced. I wouldn't try to start up a separate organization that was serving the public. There is no reason under the sun why the HGC cannot deliver word clearing, providing they are grouped in. That doesn't move all word clearing into the HGC, which you will sometimes find you have far too much word clearing to do, because I can assure you this will sooner or later get popular with the public. So I wouldn't try to run a whole new org. I would keep it to the basic job of keeping Scientology working. So with this policy letter, let us see what the basic structure is. The basic structure not of the Qual division, but of its communication lines. A mini Qual would be in the org, and there would be a Qual bureau, or it's called a correction bureau in a CLO, and it's Bureau 5A, because Training and Services is Bureau 5. And it is released with its org board of HCO policy letter 14 August 71. Well, you say, but look, wait, that if you look at this, you find out that's just the enhancement chief and the enhancement establishment section and the org Qual inspectors and so on. It doesn't seem to give any service at all. So therefore, one of these requires either in Training and Services or the service org. Nearly every one of these CLOs and so forth is acquiring some form of service org. It's got a little mini Qual in it. So what you do is you run this little mini Qual in the service org. You just make sure they have a mini Qual. Then you make sure that Quals exist. And then you push into that mini Qual this area here which says Qual Personnel Training Section of the Bureau. You push that over into the service org and you make them run it along with their intern course. But as it exists right now, the idea is that in the org itself would be a mini Qual, and then there is a bureau that takes care of it, and then we're putting together a structure here on flag. I am it just now, as far as the flag bureau hat of running it is concerned. but it will tend to move out and become established just as soon as we can establish these lines. They're in the process of establishment, in other words. Now, I just wanted to show you the basic line design is the Qual in the org, the Qual Bureau, Correction Bureau in the CLO, and then there is somebody in the Flag Bureau who is looking after that line. So here is the way that you operate at org level. You have Division 5 Qual Org Board, and it has a QualSec and a Deputy QualSec for org admin. Now you say, well, wait a minute, the QualSec's a senior, so he attends the ad council. Well, that's what's wrong. We've already piloted that out years ago, and we found out that if we didn't have an officer in Qual who went over and attended the ad council meetings and took care of all of the internal org divisional administration duties, that the QualSec never had a prayer. He couldn't do his job. So that's really the beginning, and this is where it began, of the product officer, org officer system, began in Qual on Flag. And that deputy QualSec, he takes care of all the organization or org officer actions. He makes sure that you get personnel. He attends ad council meetings. He runs around and argues with people about this or that and defends them off. And the QualSec keeps Qual running. Now, Department 13 is basically a department for the org itself. And therefore, if Department 13 is in and functioning, the org will come straight. And if Department 13 isn't functioning, the org won't come straight. So you're fond of believing that the org would be established and formed and would run all right from HCO. No, it won't. Because after HCO establishes it, then Department 13 must be there to make it functional. After they have hatted some bloke in HCO, why, they find out that he actually wasn't qualified to run lawnmowers. So there's a close cooperation between Department 13, Department of Personnel Enhancement, and HCO, particularly with the hatting section. And Department 13 will be found to be failing to the degree that Department 3 ethics is functioning. You could, after you get one of these things operating from the Bureau 5 CLO level, you could just go in to inspect 13, go into Department 3, and see how busy, how empty, or how upset that area was with regard to ethics actions, and it would give you the instant index of whether or not they had a functioning Department 13. Because this is basically personnel enhancement. You notice that isn't personnel enhancement. But it actually could be. But if you call it personal enhancement, then it would seem like a public area, which it really isn't. The expansion of the org, so great is the technical burden that this unit carries, the expansion of the org is totally dependent, really, upon the functioning of that one department. So you got a new staff member of some kind or another. He's just been hired or something. He must be brought in there and programmed. I don't care what personnel interviews he's had. He's got to be brought in and programmed one way or the other. Now, having been programmed, why then he can be put onto his training cycles and so on. Well, you're not necessarily going to train this fellow because there usually is some kind of a staff study course. And that is best run in the academy. And we find all formal training that goes down the line on a check sheet does not prosper in Qual, but prospers in the academy or the department of training, just like any other area, even when it's irregularly timed. That is to say, if the fellow, it's a part-time, that also applies to part-time. You have 3 training periods in the day or something of that sort, and it's just another part of the academy. You don't want anything to do with it. But the staff training officer that sees that people get to it and so forth, as a post, would be here and would probably be combined with programming. So what is this fellow being trained on? Well, he's being trained on this, that, and the other thing, and so on. So the first action that you get in 13 is programming. And if you program everybody in the place, why, you've got it made. And the one thing which a Department 13, when it's first put in, always has done, without any exception whatsoever, is program everybody off his post. And it unstabilizes the whole org, and that's the end of it. That is inevitably the first thing that occurs to anybody. I suppose they get it off the staff. Well, a fellow comes in, he's just been hired to fix up the garden or something of the sort. I want to be an FEBC and so forth, and I want to become the executive director. And the green programmer sits there, and he works it all out, and he says, you take this and you take that, and then you go to flag and so forth. And a while later you say, what's the matter with the lawn? Well, as a matter of fact, he's studying. He isn't studying anything to do with his post. And what is violated is this HCOB on the supreme test of the Thetan. They haven't gotten to A, so can never go to B. The supreme test of the Thetan is, can he start at A and go to B? And you will be mystified many times as why people never get to B. Well, they never get to B because they've never arrived at A. And the A in this case is he must be programmed onto the post which he has been assigned. And if he fully makes that post, he will now be at A. And having accumulated some good stats and some good service on that post, he will have enough of a win, he will be sufficiently confident that he can then be programmed to a new post, B. And he may occupy the post at A for some little time while studying for B, but that will be in the latter part of his career on A. Do you follow? But that is inevitably, we have found that to be inevitable. This is the one point which we got watched like a hawk, is in programming, are they programming them onto their posts or off of their posts? It's very simple to program somebody onto his post, unless he doesn't want to be it or something. But you'll find usually that if he doesn't want his post, he doesn't know what it is. And that is usually what happens. So you get into a word-clearing action. And you'll find that's very interesting, the confusions which you have to deal with in programming. And therefore, you have to have a fairly good line whereby the programmer isn't totally tied up with word clearing. He must be able to move the fellow aside to get some words cleared. Otherwise, he'll never get any programming done, because when you're word clearing, method 2, it can take a long while. And the programmer won't get any programming done. And if you find that programming is backlogging, it'll merely be because it is doing too much word clearing to program. And so you must have a line that moves the person who is being programmed, who is all blah on the subject and so on, and he has to have words cleared on the post which he has, and so on. Then he's got to be moved over to word clearing to do method 2. Now, you've been grooved in here recently that word clearing only does method 1, but there's nobody said that is the case. Actually, it's got such a backlog of method 1 word clearing that it's flat out to get it done. So therefore, programming can get very badly jammed up on word clearing. So there is no absolute rule that the programmer cannot word clear on two. He would have to be able to. But that if he's getting too tied up on the subject and his job is backlogging, why then it had better become a matter for the word clearing unit. And you make it. You find out that word clearing is the basic difficulty with programming. You sit there and listen to all these considerations of one kind or another, and if you buy them, you're dead. It's all a misunderstood word. And you say, well, of course, no way. You see, you can be so reasonable about it. Of course, nobody on a God's green earth would want to work in some department or another. You know, the boss of it is mean or something. Nobody'd want to work there. And, of course, you know, you get terribly reasonable. And who would want such a low-level post, you see? And you can think of a lot of things like this. And after you've thunk them all up, and you find out that he doesn't know what the word hat means or something. It becomes ridiculous. And almost anybody is better for being able to actually get to point A and get some successes on it. And get some successes on it and move on up the line. It is those who haven't done that from whom we have had the most trouble. Let me show you another mechanism here, and this is another point in programming which is terribly important to you. There is a system followed out. It was invented by psychologists, believe it or not, that if an individual does not fit in one part of an org, then he possibly has aptitude which will fit him in another part of the org. And this is one of the reasons that lies back of musical chairs. And you say, well, this fellow isn't doing all right as a male clerk. Let's see whether or not we can't put him on as reception in Division 6. Maybe he can function there. Now remember that that is a psychologist's idea. And the second you start that, you're dead. And here's why you're dead. Because there will probably be so few people in Division 6 that the next thing you know, you've got him as a department head or the distribution secretary. And then, because he is so easily sparable, he's sent off for some high-level training or something, and you've really begun it. When you program staff, when you permit staff by programming and so on to be transferred over, not having made it on this post, be transferred over to another post, it is normally into a part of an org which is empty of personnel. And that means that it has a scarcity of seniors. And that means the next thing you know, he will be the director of something. And because the personnel is still scarce, he will wind up as a secretary of the division. And then you wonder why that division doesn't work. Well, the division doesn't work not because he's a bad hat, but because he's never made A. And so he will just roam around as a random particle in the org from there on out. You start on stabilizing people without programming them very thoroughly. And it really unstabilizes the whole org. Do you see how the thing is? So this guy comes in and he smokes dope and he's horrible and terrible, and he's got a father that is PTS to his grandmother, and it's awful. And you say, well, nothing could be done with this. Well, American efficiency, it's actually a French system, I think, originally, and it had a name. It had a name. You just kept firing people. You kept hiring and firing people till you wound up with some people who could function. And that actually is a system that is followed by American business, the Army, not followed by the government. The government exclusively deals with people who can't function. They get rid of all the guys who can. The system... So you have to watch this. So you have to have some knowledge of the personnel series and transfers and HAS policies. But you have to watch this with great care, that you don't just suddenly get somebody in there and start programming people off their post. The first question of programming is, has he made the post he is on? And that is the duty of personnel programming, is to get him to make the post he is on. And when he is made, sure, maybe he got misposted. Yeah, maybe he's supposed to be a Durcom runner, and he's only got one leg. So that's tough. It's at that point you become completely unreasonable. He's got to make the post he's on, and you can do it. You can do it with word clearing and so forth. And he will eventually sit down, and he'll do this post, and he'll have a win, and he will be able to function with the post, and after a while, his stats will be in such a shape that he can be programmed for a promotion or to somewhere else. I mean, just do it with the 1, the 2, or 3. In other words, get him to A and then get him to B. And it's very sensible, but then they come in and say, this person hasn't any real aptitude in the subject of arithmetic, and we don't want him anymore in income. Our stats have been wrong every day for the last, HCO, old think is, oh, well, we'll have to get somebody who knows arithmetic, and so I transfer that fellow off. We'll send him to distribution division. There's no distribution sec right now. And so the net result of the thing is the org is just in continuous upheaval, not because they're all bad hats, because nobody has ever made anything. And they're all unstable on their posts because there's nobody in the org has ever made the post that he was put on to begin with. You can normally trace the breakdown of a personnel in an org from the first post he was removed from. And that is interesting in the field of programming. Somebody was put on one time as an aide and was taken off as an aide, and this is the sad part of it, really not taken off for incompetence. The person didn't understand that they were being posted temporarily. When the person was taken off as an aide, went promptly into a decline and went round and round and round. It was just temporary posting. They were sent to a divisional secretary afterwards. And that haunted that person for the better part of a year. And if you want to know what the basic on the chain was, this person carried around the idea that on posts he failed. And that was her relationship to a post was something on which one failed. Became very frightened of losing every post that she was on, so on. Just trace back, a minor auditing job, actually. But it won't clear up until you trace it back to the first post they lost, because there was probably an earlier post, and they didn't make that post because they weren't programmed onto it. So programming is very important. They didn't study the things necessary to make the post. And that's why you get reversion or demotion or reversion as a possible answer to the situation. Now, programming could be so extreme that this person is absolutely not making it at all in some point of the org, and you try in vain to find out, well, you find out they never got programmed onto it. They haven't held a post in the org yet. You actually, in extremis, in consultation with HCO, could recommend that the person occupy the first post. Not the first post they were successful on, but just go back and occupy the first post they ever occupied, and so on, get programmed onto this post and actually make it and get programmed on up the line. In other words, let's get this thing straight. Now, let me show you that there's a comparison to this in auditing. The way to straighten out somebody who has had 15 different programs run on him is to go to the first one that was not completed and finish it, and go to the next one that was not completed and finish it, and so on. He'll come out right as rain. You got it? So anything that you do in auditing has a comparable level in the field of programming. If you can wrap your wits around that, why, you got it made. It's just like auditing programming. I've got somebody right now who won't study his SO member hat. That was the first thing on his check sheet, and he missed it because he's too busy. He's got to do something else. Now, my think in that is, let's see, what post was this guy put on that he missed? What wasn't he ever on? Now, one of the ways you could handle the whole thing is find out what post he was never programmed properly onto, and then program him properly onto that post. And he will, because from here on, he will just start roaming around the org. He's already. So I'm just giving you the example of think. Oh, well, this fellow's having awful trouble, and he doesn't want this program. He wants some other program. See, alter is. All right, well, he's got misunderstood words galore on some earlier post that he was on. He's in a mess somehow or another. But basically, the program is out. He must have tried to take off from B without ever having gotten there. And he's just going to go on from there. He's going to be in a mad state. Oh, you could get him to study. You could audit him. You could do this. You could do that. You could do the other thing with him. You might or might not be able to bring him straight. But programming has it in its power to get it straight and just make a recommendation and say, all right, now this fellow's having an awful time with the fellow, and he's just goofing up like mad and so forth. Let's go back to the personnel record, or let's interview him and let's find out what post he failed on. Now, of course, there's posts earlier than the organization that he may have failed on. So how do you handle that? You can't go back and make him be a bank clerk and so on. Well, there's where auditing comes in, and it had to be auditing directly on former posts. You'd have to straighten it out by auditing. But in the continuous restimulation and in the environment of lost posts in the organization, he's not going to make it unless you really do get him programmed onto everything he's missed. You'll find people who have started 8 courses and have not finished any of them. If you expect them to finish any courses now without going back and finish course number 1, forget it. Because on course number 1, they've got enough misunderstood words and things to make them blow off of it and all the remaining lot. It's important. So therefore, programming has its own special skill, but it's most horse sense, and if you just treat it as though you're laying out auditing programs for the fellow, well, you're all right. You know the fatality. Putting a fellow on an auditing program, let's audit him from power up without touching Dianetics or grades. Not going to do it. Let's not finish anything on the case and then wonder what's wrong with him. So that's what it takes, and that's the basic think of programming. Now, I don't have to go into word clearing very strenuously for the excellent reason that it is the word clearing series, and it's the most self-explanatory series that anybody has ever laid out. I've been working on this. Actually, the brother, or the cousin, let me say it this way, the grandfather of the word clearing series is the Sea-Watch picture book. And Mary Sue did that, and we found out that it was difficult to teach people the complexities of bridge duties and ship handling. And she worked for a long time. I said, look, the people with whom you're dealing are TV-oriented. They're visual-oriented. So let's get out a picture book. And she worked on this, and she got out a Sea-Watch picture book. Now, it's interesting. On Lost Tech, I found out the other day that one of the reasons we were having a little trouble on the bridge is they sort of lost their copies of the Sea-Watch picture book, and people were getting specialist training without having the general training first of the Sea-Watch picture book. You could get a similar thing without anybody doing the basic bulletins of the word clearing series. Why, he all of a sudden is specialized as a word clearer. You get the idea. He specialized in picking up single words. And he doesn't know anything about method one or the rest of those. You get a kind of a messy thing because he doesn't know the scene. So the Sea-Watch picture book gave them the scene. And after they've done the Sea-Watch picture book, well, then you can specialize, train them on these things, and it's immediate, very quick. They're right on the ball. But that is the great granddaddy of this, and that's why you see some pictures involved in this thing. And it communicates with great speed. People are not having any trouble with it at all. And the reason why it has to be communicated that way is it's wrong with everybody who reads it. And boy, does it have to have a velocity of communication, because it itself is communicating about what is wrong with the person to whom it is communicating on the exact subject. And that is something for you to realize when you're getting it across. So therefore, you will see that it has pictures. And pictures are a very, very good mechanism for the communication of it. Don't think you can get away bypassing misunderstood words by getting somebody to simply punch a button or do an automatic type of procedure that if you just do this and that, why then that will come out through an automatic type of procedure. The whole civilization at this time is trying to bypass lack of comprehension by making men into machines. You'll find in this basic staff hat, Volume 0 OEC course, it says this is a bit bad to do because you spoil the individual's initiative. What does man have that is valuable? Man has initiative. He can be causative. When you try to make him over into a machine, it's just an effect. It doesn't get very effective. That's why you find me every once in a while beginning to get very, very cross if I find people are demanding too many orders. It's not that I mind giving them orders. I have done my TR0 on regiments as far as that's concerned. I can give orders. I can give them in the streams. But when they are demanding too many orders, something is wrecking their initiative. The basic thing that wrecks their initiative is the misunderstood word. So if you find an org has too many misunderstood words in it, it will demand orders. It will demand that people say, pick up your right foot and put it in front of your left foot, and then pick up your left foot and put that in front of your right foot. That's a good boy. Now, pick up the right foot. So therefore, I say I don't have to go into the technology of word clearing, but how Department 13 uses it is quite important. Therefore, you automatically and immediately assume that every time anybody is hatted, that he must be word cleared on his hat. Method 2. Instant assumption. HCO gives itself huge points. Vaulting graphs, everybody is hatted, and it's terrific, and so forth. Your automatic assumption is that they've been hatted, but they don't know what the hat means because they got misunderstood words in it. And they won't be able to operate in that sphere until you clean them up and loosen them up on that subject. And that is the assumption of Department 13. Yeah, he's been hatted, quote, unquote. Well, it's up to you to take the quotes off and put an exclamation point after hatted. Some people favor hattering by taking a German helmet, putting it on the fellow's head, and hitting him with a sledgehammer. Now, that they get very, very upset on the subject because people who, quote, have been hatted don't seem to be able to perform the functions of the post for which they have been hatted. The mystery of all that is simply the misunderstood word. And the cure for it is that one gets the person to read the most fundamental and basic materials. It doesn't even matter if the hat is terribly extensive. You merely want the earliest materials or descriptions of this hat. And you want him to read that method 2 while you comb it out of the e-meter. And all of a sudden you will find the most miraculous things start occurring with regard to this hat. So you have a direct, definite relationship to hatting. And nobody is really hatted until he has gone through 13 fully. Now you probably wondered why it's called Method 1, Method 2, and Method 3. Let me give you a sequence here that is very applicable to this department. Method 1, Method 2, Method 3, because they normally start in doing Method 3, and then they do word clearing on materials Method 2, and then they get picked up, and Method 1 is done on them. So obviously they're numbered backwards, aren't they? No. They belong just the way they are, because the first thing you do on somebody is general word clearing, Method 1, and then you do Method 2 on the materials which he has, and after that he will get smart enough himself to do Method 3. Do you notice in academies and so forth they're doing it in reverse? They have them combing all the time with Method 3, Method 3, Method 3. No. Here's some oddities which can occur. I saw somebody the other day wouldn't attest their Method 1 word clearing because they had spent all morning studying, doing Method 2, and found out there were a lot of words they didn't understand. The moral of that is get them to attest at once. It's a misnomer to some degree. When we say clearing, we think in terms of an absolute. Well, all you've done with Method 1, word clearing, is get the fundamental basics out that have been hanging them up for the last few billion. And you get those out of the road so that it's easy to do two. So it doesn't take you 7 hours to clear the word the, because it is hung up on the word g. way back. Do you follow? So that is actually, you're just doing a whole track clearing on the subject so that he can think on this subject. Now, when you do a Method 2, before you've done a Method 1, it's going to take a very long time, I can assure you, because you're sort of like you're running a late engram on the chain, and it'll grind. You see? A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. Clean up the word the. A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. Oh, God. Use it in the sentence again. Well, it's just too late on the chain. Now that you've pulled the basics with Method 1, why, now it's very easy to do 2. And you always save time by doing it Method 1, Method 2, Method 3. And you'll save a great deal of time. And so the proper sequence to handle anybody on this line is Method 1, Method 2, blow Method 3, leave that to him, leave it to the academy, leave it to somebody else, see. You won't do very much Method 3. And then purpose clearing. Now, in relationship to hatting, since this is a personnel department, in relationship to hatting, you want to do your Method 2 on anything associated with his post. Now, if you had somebody who was in the estate section who ran the car, you would want to Method 2 word clear the instruction manual put out by the manufacturer about that car. If he was an auditor, you would want to take the first bulletins of his level and Method 2 word clear them. And then take his auditor hat and Method 2 word clear it. Now, he's an auditor. He's going to have a post as an auditor. After you've done all that, post-purpose clearing. Don't try post-purpose clearing before you have done word clearing, because you will be doing them both at once. Because the funny part of it is that post-purpose clearing is very dependent upon word clearing. So if you even start talking about the purpose of the post, or wanting the post, or something like that, without doing some word clearing in connection with the thing, why, you start getting in trouble. So your programming actually will collide with this rather continuously, and it's a continuing phenomena. You'll continuously be getting somebody that you're trying to post clear while you're trying to program. So programming will run into both of these things simultaneously. And if it gets too rough, do method 1 word clearing, then method 2 word clearing on anything you want to, then do the programming. And finally, do your post-purpose clearing. Do you follow? And then you could go even further and do it even more thorough hat clean. Do you see why these things are arranged that way? Now you say, well, that isn't standard. Well, no, not all people you meet will have the same degree or volume of misunderstoods. Some people want their post but don't know much about the words, and some people think they know a great deal about the words and are sure they don't want their post. And there's combinations of this sort of thing. So in programming, in general programming, you will probably be able to get through, and you say, well, now you've got to do this. You've got to do your staff status 1 and your staff status 2, and the fellow will sit there, bull. Now, all that is great. All that is great right up to this point. The fellow didn't bother to tell you that he doesn't understand and doesn't want the post. But that will be expressed in other ways so that you'll know that you've goofed. Because there's another thing now I must tell you about programming. We find out that after a person has been programmed, let's go back to programming, because this has a definite interrelationship. After the person has been programmed, he has to be taken to the registrar and put on a course. And that is a duty of Department 13. We find that about 60% get lost between programming and the course. And if you don't program them, take them there, enroll them for that, get them down, and get them on the roll book of the course so they can be mustered, you'll miss all over the place. And that's one of the things that we have learned here recently. We have quite a bit of practical experience on this, by the way. It's not all airy-fairy by a long way. So that if you want to get the staff really wheeling on their part-time study and that sort of thing, the second the programmer does so, he either himself or if you're lucky enough to have a page and so on, the guy's taken immediately and enrolled for the first course, and is taken down and put on the roll book of that course that he is to report there at 7 o'clock. That's it. Yeah, good. Thank you. All fine now. Now you've got a staff training officer, or you have a course supervisor, or whoever is running this. It doesn't much matter. But you do have a course, and the fellow is on the course, and he can be mustered, and he can be treated as a blown student. Up to that time, he can't be treated as anything, can he? So he can be lost between that and programming. So if you want to do a good job, just remember that. Soon as he's programmed, fine. There's his program. He's supposed to do staff stage 1, staff stage 2, so on. It wouldn't matter. You have an auditor. He wants to go move up the line. He is a class 6. You're going to make him into a class 7, and ASHO, something like that. Good, you program him up. He's supposed to come over there for programming. Program him up. He's supposed to class 7. He's supposed to do so and so and so and so. And he's got certain administrative hats or something like this that you find out that he'd better do, whatever it is. And he says that's fine, and he walks out and thinks that that's it. No. He's taken immediately to the registrar, even though it's a no-charge invoice or something like that. He's taken immediately to the registrar. He's signed up. He is taken into the vicinity of where that course is actually taught, and he is put on the roll book of that course, and there you are. Now, if you've done that far, he will probably keep going with the rest of the program. But you can, in periodic roundups, you can always catch those that have fallen off the course they were enrolled on or who need to be re-enrolled for the next one. Of course, the answer to that is get hold of them, see, finish that, that's fine, good. You can take them back and get them enrolled for the next unit of it. So it's the job of this department to be causative on getting them through. Now, do you see how to play that little piano? Programming, word clearing, hatting, so forth. They're played, these elements, and they might line up in different ways or something, but you play these elements one against the other, and it all comes out straight, and you've got the guy who'll be happy in life, he'll be a staff member, he'll be winning, everything is going along fine, he can do his job, and move on up the line. Now, you notice there's something missing, and it's missing in most orgs. It's also missing on this policy letter because one didn't want to throw too much into this mini qual. But the next thing you're going to have to get in is staff auditing, which is really staff auditing. Staff auditors. If you don't have a staff auditor or two starting to add over there, and when the large staff has a staff CS, well, you're going to be in bad shape. There is one other successful way of getting a staff audited without having a large staff auditing section. And that is by scheduling auditors whose hours are down through the DFP so that staff is fed in to make up lost auditing hours. And it's an efficient method of spending the coins of the org. We used to do this in a very complicated fashion, but very successful when we were giving weeks intensives. A week-long intensive, and the staff member who wanted a week-long intensive paid the pay and forwent his own pay and paid the pay of the auditor who was auditing him. That's the most staff auditing I ever saw is when we did that. Gave up his pay for the week, and the auditor was actually paid by the pay that was given up by the staff member. Every time they had an idle auditor, they would feed in a staff member. And then people were made very sure that they had plenty of auditors, and so on. That was a workable system, Washington. Nowadays, they believe that everybody should get all of his processing free, and so forth on staff, and that may be a good thing, and it may not be a good thing. I'll tell you why it may not be a good thing, because it doesn't happen. That may be what's wrong with it. So there are no distinct policy letters which tell you what system you must use to do this. There are some that say staff's entitled to this, that, or the other thing, or something like that. But all of that is subject to amendment. The earliest policy letters relating to this are the system which I just told you. The staff member gave up his pay for the week and paid the auditor for that week because the auditor was idle that week, and as fast as they didn't have a PC, they carried on an extensive auditing staff. And as soon as they didn't have a PC for that week, well, the staff member gave up his pay. Now, you say this was terrible because you'd have staff members missing all over the org. But actually, it would only be 2 or 3 guys off staff, and then we'd make some sort of a proviso that they had to keep up their current work after hours so that it didn't jam and various other little things would occur. Maybe that wasn't so good and it wasn't prevalent. Usually it was held from above or some senior would hold it. But it didn't ever show up in the stats of the org. So a guy got 25 hours all in one whack. And that was it. And that was the most successful staff auditing program that we have ever had, which is interesting, just to give you some sideline on it. Now, the one which is current and so on would add, in addition to your word-clearing auditors and your purpose-clearing auditors and so on, would add a CS and staff auditors hired especially to do nothing but audit staff. And you've got a choice, and you say, well, that's bad, and so on. Well, I haven't seen it successful, which is why I'm giving you a choice. I would say it'd be much better just to tell DFP, why don't you hire some auditors? You know, let's knock off this 2-man HGC stuff here. Let's get some auditors. Let's get some auditors in here. You say, well, that'd be the HS. No, it isn't. It's the DFP, and it has been for ages. Let's get some auditors, and so on. And they say, well, our hours are up. Our hours are up. I don't see why you are. We got up to 7 hours and 20 minutes last week. No, hire some auditors, hire some CSs, and get some enthusiasm going, because there's a certain amount of PR and campaigning that you always have to do from personnel enhancement or from Qual. And don't think that you don't have a PR function. And I don't see that PR function being used, so I'm stressing it. Get a campaign going. You know that if we could hire about 7 more auditors, all of you guys could get audited. Wouldn't that be terrific? Because we would feed you in 2 and 3 a week on intensives. I don't see why it's also black propaganda. See, I don't see why the DFP doesn't hire some auditors, What's the matter with those people over there and the Auditors Association and so on? Why don't they have some interesting programs and attract some auditors in there and so on, and hire some people and propaganda, black propaganda. I don't see why not. You see, makes it black propaganda and mention verbally around the place, I don't know. I don't think Joe's so good. He doesn't hire any auditors lately. That's black propaganda. But the OODs of an org are very, very, very. A meeting was held in personal enhancement yesterday. Notice in the OOD, you see, and it was mentioned that if the DFP and the HAS would cooperate and hire 12 more auditors, that we would be able to get the staff audited. It doesn't say you're doing anything about it at all. It's just propaganda. You have to keep it going. You have to keep it going on a lot of points. One, that the staff should study, that they should be hatted, that they should get audited, and so on. Now, people agree with this, but very often in the pressure of GI and production and completions and so on, it can drop out as a factor, so that it would be up to Qual to keep this mentioned, these points mentioned. It's actually the points of hatting and the points of auditing staff. And if you're not on the ball with keeping this going, why, it drops out. And you become inactive and so can't do your job because you're not supported by public opinion. You're public, you see, you're the individual staff members. And you keep that going and keep that public pressing in this direction and so on. They'll say, oh, yeah, that's a good thing. Yes, we ought to have a second HGC. And yes, and so on. We should have 4 CSs. And we should have 4 HGCs, as a matter of fact. There ought to be a special course supervisor for crew study time. And, propaganda. You keep pushing it out, and people become aware these things exist, and that it's a should be. So what you want to happen is you make a should be out of it. Very simple. GI was down this week, and they're all saying why. It's because everybody went to the football game, and then the public is why you make sure that your QualSec is smart enough to answer up. The why is the staff isn't hatted. Can't be hatted because there's no staff course. Needs a supervisor. What is a course PL needs to be in, That's why your GI is down. See, it's all these points. You have to keep looking for the points where you can enter the propaganda. People say that isn't the why, but they remember it. So there's a certain amount, as I say, propaganda goes forward. And I would personally believe The only time I see, actually, lots of staff auditing occurring is when it is done during slack times and so forth in the HGC, and just adopt the principle that there should be lots of HGC or even HGC 2 or 3 or special cases or anything else. Lots of that. The public always will buy auditing. And just keep overhiring, overtraining numbers, you see. And then with this idea of feed your staff in there every time there's a blank auditor. Not on a bit and piece basis. Let me give you a warning on that. It won't do you a bit of good to take Nancy Glutz and audit her for 2 hours in February, 1 hour in July, and 5 hours in September. To hell with it. Put a PC tag on her, get the program there, and crash her through. In the first place, no CS, there's another point to this, no CS could write a program that would cover that. Nobody could write the auditing program because it stale dates instantly. And one of the greatest points of outness you will find in tech is stale dating CSs and stale dating programs. A CS stale dated 1 week is dangerous. A program stale dated a month is sudden death. You pick up this folder, what's happened for the last month? It's the old principle that you have to audit them fast enough to get them competent in the environment they're in before the environment can knock their heads off again. And this stale date means the fellow was audited, and then somebody did the next CS, and he was fine, you see, but 2 weeks later, he's being audited, but it doesn't go right at all. Now, what is going haywire with it? Well, actually, in the meantime, he's been arrested, he's lost his dog, and his wife is suing him for divorce. And, standard, normal, operating Earth procedure has been occurring. Now, the bad part of this is I have actually kept track of this recently, and I have found out something that will be of considerable value to you. I do not a lot, but I do enough skull watching. That is to say, I see somebody's down or is having a hard time, and I will call for their folder. This is obviously a QualSec duty, and it certainly is something that personal enhancement and so on, as far as staff is concerned, would have as a duty, whether it's mentioned or not. Call for the fellow's folder and look through it and see what's cooking and do some sort of a program for it or get some sort of a program on it. And get the guy some auditing, see. Now, in 5 instances, I have done that of recent times, and my CS line fell out. It's almost an unthinkable thing. It has never happened before. But my CS line fell out. That is to say, when I sent down a folder with an LRHCS in it, for the last 20 years, it is done in the morning before they audit any public PCs, practically, see. But all of a sudden, these things were being neglected for a period of time. And they stale dated. And nobody told me that they hadn't been done and that they had stale dated, but people then trying to audit or follow through this program. Of course, we're auditing a different situation, a different PC. Do you see? The PC's case had changed and so on. One of them was permitted to stale date since February. They just didn't pick up the program and carry the thing through, do pressures, terrific backlogs and pressures the thing was going into. But it was something that hadn't happened to me ever before, so it was a brand new experience. 5 of these cases that I had already done this with, and they either lost their purse or became seriously ill by the neglect of that. I followed them through. I checked it up during this last year. And because the CSs weren't done and the programs weren't done, they would have handled them, don't you see? And nothing was done with them, and they had a bad time. They had a bad time. If somebody had sat down and done those CSs, they wouldn't have. I followed the thing through. We were doing an investigation on this, basically trying to find out why there wasn't a rapid pickup of these things and straightening it out. And that was when it came up that a stale dated, I'd never had a stale dated CS or program before. And when you stale date programs and CSs, you get into trouble. So there is a certain amount of authority involved here. Now, you understand that when we talk about a mini Qual, we're talking about a Qual information. It would have to have a personal enhancement. See, it would have to be able to do these programming word clearing functions. We're even getting fancy from a mini Qual when we say it has to have a page. We're getting very fancy when it has a medical officer. But all those functions are absolutely essential to the conduct of Department 13. The functions which are mentioned here, you can't live without. If those functions are out. Now, when we start to build this up further, and we start to go into staff auditing, we could put a CS in there who fed the cases through to an HGC. Or we could put staff auditors in there. Now we're getting up someplace. Now at that time, we would start putting in a chaplain. So I'm just showing you, you must regard this as a mini Qual org board. It wouldn't matter if you had one man in Department 13. He would be the programmer, the word clearing auditor, the purpose clearing auditor. He'd be the page and he'd be the medical officer. One man. Those functions are vital. Now, as you begin to build the thing up, you will find out that you're starting to graduate up from a mini Qual. You would start putting in somebody like a CS, and you would put a chaplain. The chaplain obviously belongs there. The chaplain was originally in Qual and gave the ethics officer so much trouble and gave the Qual people so much trouble that we eventually put him into 6, but he does belong in 5. He belongs in Division 5. Because when all else fails, why, they can still go to see the chaplain. And we find out that it's necessary to have somebody standing there to catch it and to reroute them sort of into the lines, because sometimes people neglect a person utterly. And if he's got some terminal he can go to, why, maybe he can straighten it out and get unbugged. So that's public. Now, the second you put the chaplain in there, you're starting to get into the public sphere. Now, you're already going to be in the public sphere if you start word clearing in such a way. If you start word clearing in such a way that you're selling word clearing, let me tell you a trick. Be perfectly willing to CS it and everything else, but make sure they beef up the HGC and do the word clearing there. You got it? Why? Because your staff will cease to have word clearing. So regardless of where the word clearing is done, Department 13 is the czar of word clearing. Even though HGC auditors were being grooved in, even though HGC auditors were being grooved into word clear and that sort of thing, you would groove them into word clear in Department 13. Wouldn't matter who did it, you're still responsible for it. The CSing of it is still done from here. But if you let go of that to the degree that you suddenly, you see, this department can make an awful lot of money. This department can make money left and right because word clearing is valuable. It gets word of mouth, strangely enough, like mad, and it's very saleable. And you find at this point, when public sale is denying the hatting and word clearing functions necessary to keep up your tech, you make sure that that moves straight over to the HGC, while retaining control of the quality of it. It's done by HGC auditors. You don't want anything more to do with it, as far as auditing it's concerned, because you're essentially there as an exporter of knowledge. You follow? So you've got to keep word clearing in regardless of who does it, and you've got to make it sure that you just don't get swamped. Now, you could actually start accounting for a third of the org's GI with enthusiasm. The second you find yourself doing that, you know very well nobody's going to get added. What's this org going to do? This org's going to go into a depression right away. New staff's going to come on because it's expanding. Nobody's going to program them. Nobody's going to make sure they get down training. Nobody's going to propagandize the place. Hey, how about hatting these people? How about training them on their hats? How about this? How about that? Second that goes out, your org's going to head right straight for a non-delivery, or for such a bad quality delivery that boom's going to crash. And I must tell you something about booms and depressions that has a great deal to do with Qual. When Qual does not keep up quality, it goes into, and delivery, it goes into a depression. We have finally traced down exactly how this happens. They get GI, GI, GI. They get more and more GI, and then the GI starts to go down. And then the GI starts to go down further, so they scream harder and harder and get new tricks for GI, and they try harder and harder to get more GI, and the GI goes down. And then they try and work and work and work and work to get in GI, and try and try and try and try and try to get in GI, and the stat goes down. And we found out that that was the fault of the ECWW network and why it ran into booms and depressions, and it's even worse than that. It is why the society at large runs into booms and depressions. Booms and depressions were the bane of civilization up to about 1932. Now they've got just one long depression. It has to do with delivery. It has to do with delivery. You'll find out that England's collapse as an empire might be assigned to many political motives, but it ceased to deliver. You can't get parts for English cars overseas. You can't get this. You can't get that. In England, you try to get a part for a motor. Yeah, we'll make it. It'll be 6 months. They don't deliver anymore. That's what's happening to their pound and their currency. Let me tell you, there's a success story going on right this minute. Somebody left flag here. You see it. It's in, I think, LRH Ed 151. Left flag here. Went back to Toronto. Orga is all upset, and the things are all going to and this, that, and so on, and they're everybody's been fighting for GI, and ECUS was coming in there every 24 hours with a new mission. They weren't missions, so that was the trouble with them. And so on, and the whole org was coming apart. Guy went back here. He actually went up to OK to audit 6. He had the idea of flubless auditing. We checked him through like mad on the thing. He went back. He was already in HSST. He just started, as part of his hat, grabbing some folders. He was the assistant guardian. Started grabbing some folders. So, well, to hell with this. Tech's out in this joint. He opened up a cramming. And boom. It's the only org right now with its stats going right on up because it's delivering like mad. Nobody else delivering. There's a new stat been assigned to orgs. There's a new harass system been assigned to orgs and so forth to get them to deliver. But that was what picked up the thing off the launching pad. Been reports in here about it and so on. This thing has been subjected, by the way, to an analysis that you wouldn't believe. If you went down into CIC, you'd see these huge tapes all spread around walls and information put up all over there. That is all it is, and that is booms and depressions. So when they try to get GI without delivering, they spoil the public. If the delivery quality is poor, it wouldn't matter how they screamed. If they're not delivering good training, if they're not delivering good auditing, if the stuff isn't straight, that is the other thing. All they got to do is tell them that something is verbal or something isn't done now, and the public leaves them alone in droves. Because basically it's knowledge. And that is the one org right this minute that has it's got its delivery stats are going right on up, and it's got its GI going right on up, and the area is all cooling off, and everything is getting into a fine, smooth flow. Their main trouble right now is just volume. But they got it. That's the answer. It's the answer to booms and depressions. So guys say GI, 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 GI. Well, then Qual must say quality, 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 quality. Deliver, 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 deliver. What do you mean having a $10,000 week last week without also having a $10,000 delivery? Yes, yes. Well, I know you can't deliver it in the same week and nobody's telling you to, but you better deliver that backlog. How much undelivered services there is in this place? Well, they'll have to hire 142 auditors, and that's 30 auditors per HGC, and you will at once have to have, that's the way to think, see? That tells you will instantly have to have at least 5 CSs and 144 auditors. That's good. Let's get busy. And it's all got to be flubless, and they all got to be on the ball, and it's all got to be done yesterday. Anybody can get in GI. Oh, it takes a trick. But it doesn't take very many people to get in a GI. It takes quite an organization to deliver. And it takes a very hot organization with a very, very, very hot Qual to deliver flubblessly. So that brings us to 14. 14 has something that they have never had before. PubZorg is doing a great job of assembling policy. It's got it assembled, it's publishing it. There will be auxiliary books and so forth to supplement the OEC volumes. There will be more to catch up with policy been issued since. But they've done a great job, and it's taken years. So that makes your job on that much easier. And they also are now beginning, because many of them are already in print, they're now beginning on equivalent volumes of OEC volumes with all bulletins published consecutively. Following that will be a transcription of all tapes. That's quite a ways up the line. But an org library. Now there are certain packs. Let us take an ASHO. An ASHO that does not have available power packs. I mean, an SH that doesn't have available power packs. It's a bad show. You'll find most power auditors and CSs particularly and so on assemble their own packs in their own library and so on. Well, so, great. That's fine. You're not a substitute for that. It's an org library. And you just get your hands on at least 2 of every pack on tech or policy or anything else that has ever been issued. And you put a great big red stripe with a great big stamp on the master copy, which mustn't be removed from the area, and you carefully sign out any spares that you have, and you get them recovered. In other words, you have an actual library, not just some books lying around. And if you're really building the thing up, you should have a copy of every tape ever made. Now, that's quite a library, but we would be in a position somewhere up the line to furnish that. But you certainly should have a basic copy of every tape being used in HCI, not just all the tapes in HCI. And that's a full library. Now, you're in the business of knowledge. Well, that's where it's concentrated in the org. Now, the duties of the librarian have not been written up, but they are simple enough. They do the standard duties of a librarian. They never let the master copy out. They could have some area there where somebody can sit and read and look up something. They always have a master copy of everything they own. And they answer questions. Now that takes an interesting librarian, because he's the Technical Information Center. Tech Information Center. So if there's any other technology that you're using, such as the lawnmower and so forth, he's got it too. So all booklets about all equipment in the org also belong in that library. Now that librarian has got to be enough on the ball to be able to look up this volume, or be able to tell the guy, look in that volume, and here it is. Now there's actually technical indexes have been made, and we have been trying to get them issued, but they're being issued along with this HCOB series. You'll find that the OEC volumes are extremely good in their indexing. Information. Where can the guy go to see it? Not to be told verbally it. Where can the guy go to see it? And so on. Well, that is Department 14's library. That's the Knowledge Center. And so you don't get verbal data lines or anything of the sort. And you also can get this kind of a situation. Some senior in Division 2 tells this fellow immediately to move out all of those CF folders and so forth because they're not using those now and something. And he says it's in policy they should. And this fellow says that doesn't sound very sensible to me. He's got to have some place to go where somebody will tell him what policy to look up. He may be quite green. He may not be that well trained. Do you follow? What is policy on this subject? Well, your librarian should be able to inform him. It's not that he can backflash particularly, but he would be guilty of following an illegal order, and following the illegal orders is what tears these orgs to pieces. Guys do illegal duties. They do projects which have never been okayed. They can be told anything. I saw a whole org ruined one time where somebody just sat there and told every staff member whatever they wanted to do. It's against policy. Yeah, well, that's against policy. Well, that's fine. That's a good idea to actually write invoices on people when they come in and pay money, but it's against policy. It was almost that corny. Tore the org to pieces. Actually, the org has just recently begun to lift its head. It was Washington, D.C. There was no place anybody could go to find out what policy was. It was very scarce in the org. Now, that is also there because you've got your cramming section there. So what happens with cramming? Guy goes in. He's told that he must not list more items past the BDFN item. And he's told by the CS that he mustn't list any additional items past this. And that he must immediately go to cramming and is something or other, and he's flunked and so on. Now, if there isn't an existing body of HCOBs and PACs on the subject of listing and nulling and so forth, he could be left in the complete fog. He could think this was true. Happens that it isn't. It isn't true. Sometimes in cases that are really jammed up and whose roots are kind of while you're nulling, you have to list further to get the charge off the thing. The listing is still giving you TA action, but he's already passed the item. Actually, he will put it back on the list if you'll keep going further. Sometimes he won't. And that's about the only time you get hung up. But if the guy keeps giving you items and you didn't write them down, you chopped him off, why, you would have a session ARC break. So it doesn't appear any place in listing and nulling policy. Well, where could such an auditor go to check it up? Now, he's sent to cramming, so he goes in cramming, looks this up, and he doesn't find it. In other words, his tech cannot be invalidated and thrown out, and that is the principal method by which auditors are ruined. They're told that tech exists, and they're invalidated for using proper tech. They're told that tech exists which doesn't exist. If cramming doesn't immediately have fully available a full library of tech, then you've got a mystery. There's a mystery someplace, right? It's a hole. You follow me? So if you're going to cram, force feed knowledge into a guy, for God's sakes, have the proper materials to force feed him with. You got it? So a cramming, which exists without a library, would be a curse. It isn't what your cramming officer knows. A cramming officer will get fairly smart. A cramming officer actually has to be right on the ball, so that he doesn't feed a bunch of stuff in, because very often he has to be enough on the ball to be able to look at this guy and say, what's he doing? And a clever cramming officer just solve them left and right because of visual observation. Here, sit down, do TRs with this guy. Oh, it's quite obvious those TRs around. Another fellow could never get any reads on a list. And all these lists were all null. PC with his interiorization run down out, and he's got overts, and he's got everything and so forth, and yet the whole list that should have picked this up is null. Well, that's an awful mystery. Well, we found out the guy had his meter clear over here on the left-hand side of him, and he couldn't possibly see the list and the meter at the same time, so I don't know what he thought he was doing. And the cramming officer simply picks this up, adjusts it, shows him where to put his meter, shows him line of sight, and practices around, then found out that he wore glasses with such a thick rim that when he looked here, he couldn't see there. So he had to solve his glasses, and he finally salvaged and made an auditor who had lists that could read. But a cramming officer also has his visual observation, but he mustn't be throwing a whole bunch of hidden data into the auditors, or he won't wind up with flubless tech. Now, your whole key here to flubless auditing in an org is contained right here in Department 14. And if you're going to ever have up stats in an expanding org, that tech has got to be flubless. And if you're ever going to have flubless tech, you've got to have a functioning 14. It's got to have an intern supervisor. It's got to have a library. It's got to have a cramming officer. And now, believe it or not, we're talking about a mini Qual. God knows what you could make out of this. You could have 7 different cramming supervisors, and cramming could be sold, and intern supervisors, and you could have 5 intern courses running simultaneously. This thing could really be up to a big dress parade proposition. Got so many personnel now that it has to have a special personnel officer. So the key to flubless auditing is right here. Now, with the development and re-release of word clearing, and with the tremendous bearing that has upon the efficiency and happiness and orderliness of an org, administratively, as well as technically, with that recodification and simplification, because you'll find that's very easy to do. Very easy to train people to do that. You got the entrance point of Qual. And now your Department 14 is easily afforded because the org's much more affluent, not because you're making money in 13. 13 makes money all over the org. Now you can really afford to go for broke on 14. You never let anybody, I don't care if he's an HSST that has audited for 17 years in Seattle, if he has never had any okays to audit and has never been checked out in any way, shape, or form, and so forth, you're going to intern him till you find out what it is all about, and you get that auditing flubless. Now, auditing is flubless either because they don't know, or they haven't drilled, or because of misunderstood words. And that's the only 3 reasons. They don't know. They haven't drilled. Or they have a misunderstood word. You say, well, the guy could be blind and he couldn't audit. Ho, 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 there is a sonic e-meter. Yes, it is true that a person who rock slams that has evil intention toward the organization will try to pull the rug out from underneath it. The funny part of it is, if you just word clear him, it'll desensitize. If you follow down the subject of the rock slam, you can also find the evil purpose that motivates him and pull it. It's very easy to make somebody sane. People are aberrated because of misunderstood words. People are insane because of evil purposes. So you got the whole package right here, because on purpose clearing, you inevitably will turn on the rock slam. If the guy's crazy, you will turn on the rock slam when you're purpose clearing. Now, with that proviso, that until that's handled, you're not likely to make much of an auditor, but you can still desensitize it, oddly enough, with word clearing, to a point where he hasn't got to wreck PCs. So you really have got it in the bag, and that's what flubless auditing consists of. See? Knowledge, drill, misunderstood word. Now you say drills, well, yes. Actually, we're just packaging up a drills course which has a drill for every auditing action, the wildest thing you ever saw in your life. It hasn't been piloted out to amount to anything yet, but it's been done by experts. And that goes right in the direction of your cramming section. Regardless of whether you taught a drills course, this fellow can't seem to do listing and nulling. Well, they're listing and nulling drills. So it's written down, and these are the steps. So the cramming officer simply would have to take this, hand it to him, listing and nulling. He just does the steps with the meter sitting there, and he goes through it on a sort of a doll proposition until when he gets the steps down. He says, oh, I see. I got it, you know. He goes through the motions, because it's the confusion of sequence of motions is what he's up against. He's unsure of them. So the second the cramming officer can pick out from a whole pack of great big, long, thick pack of drills, he can pick the drills that the fellow has been funking in his auditing and make him drill those things. And the second that you can set him up with another guy and have him read the bulletins he's supposed to be doing on method 2 and pick up the misunderstood words. If you've got a library there that has the information in it, well, you got it made, flubless auditing. Piece of cake. For instance, I found 2 cases the other day that had been bunged up. They brought them out straight, but I found 2 cases that had been bunged up the other day, and they were bunged up because the interiorization pack and the interior exteriorization pack wasn't understood. They corrected it last. It wasn't understood. Now that somewhere in that mess there is a misunderstood word. So a cramming officer has to choose amongst these things. The guy hasn't got the knowledge, the drill is out, or he's got a misunderstood word, and cramming gets to be a piece of cake because to that you only have to add observation. And he can look at this fellow, and this fellow actually is auditing with a right-hand meter, but he's a left-hand auditor. Nobody ever audited him. He doesn't know that a left-handed meter is available. There is. And so your cramming becomes much simpler, but that is the direction to which you're going in cramming. Right now, dub it along. Get the cramming officer, get him check out on the bulletins, get him to do this and get him to do that. But you're in a position right now, the second you get this qual functioning, to say the most likely reason he missed it. There are 2 most likely reasons he missed it. He never read it in the first place, which is, by the way, the commonest reason. You know, the whole group of auditors will go in and run some new rundown without ever reading the bulletin. They ought to be shot, but they do it every time. You have to actually groove in. You see a new piece of tech come into the org, anything like this, they're supposed to be doing that they haven't been doing. First think in Qual. Let's round them up. Get them to read it and check it out. First thought. First guy comes up with a question. I don't understand how this cancels out and so on. Isn't there some confusion? Word clearing. See? That's the pattern think. Material I haven't been doing? Check it out. Have funny considerations on it? Word clearing method 2. Bang, bang. You get it? So that makes you a very simple cramming area. Now, we've just got through putting together the whole intern setup from A to Izzard. And I got that investigated like mad, and we put that together, and I grooved it in and so forth, and it's pretty good. On every one of those sheets, however, there isn't a word clear of the material of the subject, and it's now being put on the intern check sheets. So that after the guy comes out of the academy, and you word clear him, everybody word clear him, he's all set, he's fine, in beautiful condition, good auditor, all ready to start, then the first thought as he goes in as an intern is, what are we going to do with this fellow in off the street? Entirely different think. And that's been present for years. Most Ds of P, who were very smart in the old days, would not let an auditor audit unless he'd been trained in the HGC. Well, you're the substitute for that. That was the think, because it was too hard to work with them. They weren't practiced enough. So they had to be checked over. And there are certain things you have to know to be an HGC auditor that's different than just knowing how to audit. So we've got a nice intern course. It has nice packs and so on. And the lower parts of that course apply to every org. So you got it. Made in the shade. Here's an intern course. You can intern. You got your drills packs coming right up. They're now being mimeographed at this moment. So now they put the chaplain over here in the wrong area on my card. So make your correction. Your chaplain goes back to enhancement 13 as a correction of this policy letter 14 August. Your staff trading officer and staff processing officer also move over into that other area. It doesn't much matter where they are there, or it doesn't much matter if they are there. But remember that is the individual. Now, basically, you're dealing with the public in Department 14, and you're dealing with the whole org. As you expand, you will find there's an org correction section. Department 13, you're dealing with the individual staff member. Here you're dealing with the broad subject of technology and getting it grooved in. The happiness and performance of duty and other things of the individual staff members, the business of 13. You see how the division is here. All right, you say, well, it's mean of me to throw you a curve here at the last minute, but I'm just looking at what has been written up and laid down. And your mini-qual actually requires that you take care of the individual staff member in 13, and that you take care of the org and its production in 14. And those are the division between the two things. Now, I'm telling you some things here that are based on very long line experience with having worked with a Qual. And I've worked with a Qual very hard here in the last couple of years. All the materials that we have, not only worked with everything that was, at this moment, everything that is the HGC or the tech division at this particular time was once Qual here. So we've seen practically everything that can go wrong in a Qual and right in a Qual, and see how the lines go and how they don't go. And we're in a position of having piloted the living daylights out of Quals. Also, the first Qual that went in at St. Hill was a fairly successful Qual. So that everything that went in at St. Hill is over here in Department 15, the original Qual, whatever it was. The chaplain was in Qual then, but he's moved back over. So what do we look at here? What do we look at here? We're looking at Qual I in Department 15. We're looking at the student examiner, the PC examiner. We're looking at certs and awards, and that is all beautifully covered in policy and was one of the things that was a Qual, and everybody has that. So there isn't anything new or strange being introduced into that area at all. You'll find out most orgs have something vaguely resembling an examiner, and they have something vaguely resembling a certs and awards. So you don't disturb them. Give them some help if you can, and then you put together a mini Qual. Mostly it'll be the construction of 2 more departments. Now, there undoubtedly will be things constructed on this line. There will undoubtedly be evolutions and so forth, but this is very easily the best Qual that I have ever seen. It's a doll baby. And when I first took a look at this, I said, look, that's very easy to get in. It is very easy to train auditors for it. So. Now, the technology which it uses is not very extensive. Now, let's see if we can't build up this technology so that it is well packaged. Drills course. This Qual will be so popular, nobody will think of reducing it or scanting it, because it's hung on the solid anchor point there of Department 13, word clearing. Yeah, well, let's take a look here. We've got something new. We've got really what is basically, we could call it, to begin with, a mini Qual, because we just slide word clearing in. And then we say we really got to have more extensive cramming facilities. That requires more of a library. So now that requires the librarian is really the org information officer. For we have to have a bigger room here. It should have a counter, you see. And we need a whole classroom for our intern course and so on. So it's strictly a camel in the tent caper. He puts his nose in, and then he gets his eyes in, and he gets his ears in, because this is going to build up. Because it will build up viably. Is the more effective this Qual is, the better that org is going to function. What's wrong with those stats right out there, the length and breadth of anywhere, is lack of flubless auditing, lack of flubless training, course supervision, not on at all. What is a course PL? That sort of thing. Guy's read it, but he doesn't know the word course. So they only got in trouble when they didn't deliver. So obviously they aren't delivering because somebody doesn't understand something. Well, somebody must not have understood something about the original thing. The reason you sell auditing and training is to deliver it. Well, if they can't deliver auditing and training, well, they're going to collect a lot of money. They're going to have to refund. Going to collect a lot of money, use it all up, not going to deliver anything in the area. People are going to be very upset, and that stat is going to go down, down. And it wouldn't matter how many people, with how many circuses moved into the area to get the GI up, that GI is going to go down. Do you see? Because it isn't money that exports. It is knowledge. Money just continues too far, will contract the area. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't make money, but make sure that that money is counted in terms of paid deliveries. And Qual is right there to make sure that the quality of those paid deliveries and their volume is great. And the morale factor enters in. Without a Qual, you say Department 13 is dedicated mostly to the morale of the individual staff member. Can he do his job, his individual requirements, and so forth? Fine, that's fine. But the basis of morale is production. If a guy doesn't produce, no matter how many ice cream sodas he is served with staff serving girls in bikinis per hour, his morale is going to go splat. It's his own production that brings up his morale, because that also brings up his pride. Now, as far as morale is concerned, the guy starts producing, and he's producing, and he produces this and that, and he can end cycle on this, that, and the other thing, because in production, the cycle starts, changes, and stops. And at those stops, why, you get a morale surge. And then all of a sudden, if your auditing is flubless, you're going to have people walking around and congratulating the staff, and it's all getting very cheerful and happy and uptone. And people start running instead of crawling along, and things start happening around the place, and it's generated enough speed of particle flow to generate power. And the organization becomes very powerful. The germ which starts all that is Qual. And it's the mini org board that you got right here. Get it in bit by bit by bit. Build the thing up. The next thing you know, the org will rise in direct proportion to the success of Qual. I wish you luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.